Well, I often say it, and it sadly comes true, and sometimes it's a good thing. Those who do not know their history are bound to repeat it. And we all expect this adage is true, and I oddly see that it is most of the time, especially when it comes to political discourse. But what does it actually mean, and who are the role models that we should look to in history to show us how to shape our future? Well, for the nation's founding fathers, it was the great statesmen and generals of the Roman Republic. In a recent article entitled, "Why Knowing Roman History is Key to Preserving American History," one professor says we need to go back to our roots, our Roman roots. Well, I've got to bring in our resident historian, Dr. Joseph Ricci, to discuss what Roman history and what it has to do with America today. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, you're welcome, Scott.
You know, we're going to do a little history review on this one. We're going to actually go down, because I think it's very important as we're finding in all the different times that conflicts we have right now. How did the ideals of the Roman Republic shape the founding of this nation? And do you agree that there was a lot of things that are awfully similar between the two?
Absolutely. So the ideals of the Roman Republic were really at the core for our founding fathers. Now, in the more general sense, yeah, we're a democracy in the sense that, you know, we choose our representative leaders, right? We're not an empire, we're not a kingdom. But in the technical sense, I've heard you speak about this before, we are a republic.
Yeah, but you and I have this fight all the time, democracy versus republic. Okay, but this is coming, that argument goes all the way back to the Romans.
So the difference is that the two ideals for democracy and republic in the ancient times were Athens, which was a democracy, and the Roman Republic. The difference being that in Athens, things were very volatile. The citizens directly voted for different referendums, which could lead to ups and downs all the time, violence. The Romans were more conscious of this, and they chose representative leaders, or they had the senators who were supposed to represent the people, although they weren't directly chosen by them. But they had their own systems of checks and balances. For instance, the tribunes could veto something, like the president is given the veto power for us. This was very much in the minds of our founding fathers when they were writing the Constitution and declaring independence from Great Britain. You have people not only seeing themselves as founding a republic, but even thinking of themselves like the great Roman orators like Cicero and Cato, and the great Roman generals like Scipio Africanus, who conquered North Africa from Hannibal. The best example I could probably give is a guy named Cincinnatus. Now, the Romans had a couple of consuls who they elected, and they were their presidents, let's say. But when there was danger, or when an enemy was invading, they would elect what they called a dictator. And so this dictator, this guy Cincinnatus, this was his name, he went out, he fought Rome's battles, he was elected dictator, and when he came back, he famously laid down his arms and went back to farming. This is what George Washington thought of himself as doing when he wasn't elected king for our nation. He was elected president, and after 2 terms, he laid down, quote-unquote, his arms and let the next president come through.
That's interesting. So that's where that comes from, and the fact that he wanted to kind of follow that type of tradition on that side of it. What is that called, though, when the article points that, you know, we've moved away from these ideals? Do you kind of agree? Because then obviously, I mean, we do have to change with the times a little bit.
Yeah. So I think the article was really arguing, this author, so in history we tend to critique things a bit. We don't tend to build guys up. And I found myself, as a historian, reading through this article and looking for criticism points. He points to the idea that what we need to do is we need to know history, Roman history, in order to know what our founders were doing, in order to move forward into the future. But I was asking him, sort of when I was reading this, what exactly does he think our future should be? So I did some research into a book that he's recently written called Killing for the Republic, where he argues that what's very important for our viewers and for our citizens is that we understand that citizen soldiers is really what we need to have in the United States. That we need to have people who volunteer and go to war for the United States of their own will, that we don't use mercenaries. And this is something you see in the modern world now. Our citizenry seems unwilling to go to war in Iran, with Saudi Arabia, for example, the most recent example. And we seem to be turning more towards mercenaries in Afghanistan and in Iraq. So he's speaking to these kind of salient current points that we're making in our own society.
Well, and prior to that, we were looking for people to help establish us, to help us get established as a country. Now it seems like we're trying to help others in some form establish a more formative government. Now, we hear a lot right now that America is similar to the decline. Now, the Roman Empire, every good thing comes to an end. The Roman Empire did decline. Do you agree that we are kind of in that phase, and what are some of the warning signs? And, you know, I go back to Benjamin Franklin. He said, here's a republic if you can keep it. So is that kind of, do you believe that that could be true?
It's really hard to say as a historian. There are some points where, let's say, for example, we are expanding our military and our military expenditure, and that does tend to lead empires down the tubes, as they say. However, if you look at Roman history, it took 1,000 years until the Renaissance, until a guy named Petrarch said, look at this Roman Empire. When it fell, we had the Dark Ages. It took 1,000 years for Europe to realize that the Roman Empire had fallen and that this was a significant event. It's a little bit harder for us, therefore, for politicians to say, oh, the empire is declining. It's really hard to make these judgments.
And hopefully we are also an optimistic country still, even at this point, despite all of our hardship. That's what happens as a country. There's not a single country that has ever existed throughout time or on this earth that does not have to go through challenges. The question is, how do you handle them?
Exactly.
Thank you, Dr. Ritchie, for joining us and giving us a little history lesson today.
Thank you.
It's hard to clear through